Thank you so much. And hello, everybody. My name is Norma Levy, and I'm the founder and president of New Plaza Cinema. Today, we look forward to a lively discussion about the 1974 Oscar winning film Paper Moon, directed by Peter Bogdanovich. And now I'm pleased to introduce our host. It's our wonderful curator, Gary Palmucci. Gary, please join us.
Okay, let's see. Possibly muted. Hi there. Gary Palmucci coming into you today from somewhere south of Portland, Oregon, where it was 101 degrees yesterday and something close to that today. So I'm holed up here in a very pleasantly air-conditioned condominium, and it's great to be here with you. So director Peter Bogdanovich, who passed away earlier this year, was certainly a seminal figure in the late 60s and early 70s Renaissance period of mainstream American filmmaking. In his best films, he melded his love of old master filmmakers like John Ford, Howard Hawks, Leo McCarey, along with the new frankness of that era. His breakout film, The Last Picture Show, provided a very memorable subject for one of our first talkbacks. And we later heard from a colleague that Bogdanovich himself had watched our recording of the program and enjoyed it. And you know we love that. Today, we're taking a look back at his 1973 film, Paper Moon, which combines The Last Picture Show's black and white grit, as well as some near slapstick comedy and the poignant drama of a seemingly makeshift family in 1930s rural Midwestern America. Now, Max, that opening close-up of Tatum O'Neal at her mother's funeral in the movie seems to thrust us instantly into a very bleak physical and emotional landscape. And yet the trailer makers seem to have something else in mind, as you discovered. I had never seen this one myself.
They did. We'll talk more about that opening of Paper Moon, but this, you're going to see the original Paramount trailer from 1973. And of course, it received some Academy Award for Tatum O'Neal the following year. But this trailer, it's an unusual early 70s trailer. We've got outtakes, we've got shots of behind the scenes action, and from the film itself, we can discuss its effectiveness after we take a look at the original.
Be on the lookout for a quick shot of director Bogdanovich himself, looking like he just came off the set of a movie he'd worked on a few years earlier, The Wild Angels, with Nancy Sinatra.
That's him with the clapper board, as you're going to see. Here's the original Paper Moon trailer.
Keep your sunny side up, up, high.
Kansas, 1936. Out of the darkest days of the Depression comes the adventures of two unlikely con artists, Mose Prey and his companion, Addie Loggins.
You better go slow and hurry. Uh-oh.
I heard you was a bootlegger.
Oh, no, sir. Not me, friend. Must be some mistake.
Ryan O'Neal is Mose Prey. His most challenging film role.
Keep rolling. I got it. Keep rolling.
Tatum O'Neal, daughter of Ryan O'Neal, is Addie Loggins, her very first film role.
Howdy.
Howdy.
What?
Get the phone.
Well, tell me, Jack, what have you been doing with yourself?
Last night, I was invited over to Fred Allen's apartment for dinner.
This is the Peter Bogdanovich production, Paper Moon. Or, as P.T. Barnum put it, there's a sucker born every minute.
Yes?
Afternoon, ma'am. I was wondering if Mr. Bates might be at home.
Mr. Bates is dead.
My name is Prey, Kansas Bible Company. I'm just here to deliver this Bible that Mr. Bates ordered.
Bible?
Bible? What kind of Bible? What company you say you're from?
Just when you think you got it made. Just ain't made, is it?
Say it's only a paper moon sailing over a cardboard sea.
You crazy? Hey!
Keep your sunny side up. Keep it up.
Well, tell them at the time you almost got thrown in jail, Miss Trixie.
Oh my God.
Stop them people! Hey, there's bootleggers late!
Keep rolling. I got it. I'm gonna hit him!
He can jump! Don't slow down!
Don't you go making the decisions. I make the decisions. All you gotta do is look like a pretty little girl. Shooting at us!
But then listen, keep going! You met my mom in a barroom.
Just because a man meets a woman in a barroom don't mean he's your pa. Eat your Coney Island. You don't have to worry. I ain't about to leave some poor little child stranded in the middle of nowhere. I got scruples too, you know. You know what that is, scruples?
No, I don't know what it is, but if you got him, I sure bet they belong to somebody else.
We ain't gonna make it.
You're going to ruin it, ain't you?
Hang on!
Don't miss this one from the maker of The Last Picture Show and What's Up, Doc?
You won't be sorry.
And there we have the original trailer. Outtakes it all.
Well,
So
it
the-
almost looks like they wanted to duplicate the trailer from What's Up, Doc or something to sell Paper Moon, which wasn't completely appropriate. But watching the film again, and I hadn't seen it in almost half a century, I got the feeling like total confidence on Bogdanovich's part, juggling bleak drama, comedy, almost slapstick comedy, poignant relationship between the real life father and daughter. Feeling like, you know, there's nothing he couldn't juggle, no tones that couldn't be deftly handled. That's the feeling I got. Total confidence of a director who just had two utter smash hits in a row and just felt like he was riding on a cloud.
You had those desolate flatland Kansas landscapes that apparently production designer Polly Platt and others were very inspired by, because the action, and Dan Cahill, who will be joining us in a little while, is going to discuss in addition to other things, the literary origins of the film. The narrative originally taking place in the South, and Bogdanovich wanted it relocated, and they settled on the Middle West. But those desolate landscapes that contradict the comedy very effectively. And it's, as you say, it's a remarkable balancing of tone and theme here, with impeccable performances right down to the smallest role that appears.
That's right, and some character actors whom I had either forgotten about or not seen on the screen in a long time. That wonderful young girl, her name is initials now. I was just looking at it before we came on.
PJ Johnson.
PJ Johnson.
Bogdanovich told, I can't tell it as well as he does. I just can't. But it's a classic, where when she was 16 years old, she played Madeline Kahn's Trixie Delight's assistant in the film, and they auditioned 7 girls for the part. And when PJ Johnson showed up at the audition, she took a look at Bogdanovich and said, "Ooh-wee, you're good looking." And apparently that was it. She was hired right then and there. And Dan is going to share some of the other casting decisions that Bogdanovich made.
And yet, sadly, she had no screen career to speak of after that. She's wonderful in the film. She turned up in another one of his pictures many years later, but that's pretty much it.
Very, very powerful. Some wonderful scenes with her and Tatum O'Neal when they're talking in the car before the end of that section. And it's a shame she didn't do more. And you have these other wonderful character actors that we've seen. Burton Gilliam, who played Floyd.
That's another one who was a high point for me. I looked at his credits, a very hardworking character actor, probably been in 100 films, everything from Blazing Saddles, to Jericho Mile, to Claude Lelouch's American Western, Another Man, Another Chance, and lots of TV.
Yeah, he was terrific. And then just, of course, we had Randy Quaid as Leroy, who fights with O'Neill. Randy Quaid was already on the ascension there. He'd already been in the Last Picture Show, but he was already appearing that year or he was already cast in The Last Detail, which was a major part for him. But as a favor to Bogdanovich, he took on this smaller role.
Right. He wasn't afraid to get humiliated in Peter Bogdanovich's films, that's for sure.
Precisely. And then just some other outstanding character actresses who, I mean, I'm sure we've seen them elsewhere, but there was Deja Moore, who played the sales girl who was having issues over the $20 bill, and then Jodie Wilbur, who's the cafe waitress in the famous "I Want My $200" scene. Just these wonderful little bits.
Yeah.
And then you have Madeline Kahn. This is her second appearance with Bogdanovich, having already appeared in What's Up, Doc, and is nigh flawless as Trixie Delight. And Ryan O'Neill's character is going to eventually meet his match in the form of John Hillerman, another fantastic actor from the film, cast as brothers in two completely different characters. He had appeared briefly in The Last Picture Show as one of the teachers in the high school, in the beginning, and then he has a very memorable one-scene appearance in What's Up, Doc as a hotel manager after Ryan O'Neil and Barbara Streisand have pretty much burned down the hotel room. He has a wonderful scene there, and then he appears here in Paper Moon as well.
Well, I think Bogdanovich liked the idea of having like his own little stock company as well, like his heroes Ford and Hawks and others had done, in previous decades, and they served him very well, at least in this stage of his career.
They did, and I talked a little bit about this on Wednesday, is that this was and I say this because it's rare to encounter a director who really loved actors or who loves working with actors. A lot of directors are intimidated by them. It's easier to deal with the technology than with human beings. But Bogdanovich, because he had done some acting of his own, but he loves actors. And even in the films that were not successful, the performances are always strong. And yes, he did like this repertory group to work with again and again, which extended to some of the behind the scenes talent like Laszlo Kovacs, who did the wonderful cinematography.
Yes.
And Dan will talk a little bit more about that. And Ryan O'Neil, this is his second film in a row for Bogdanovich. He of course is hot 3 years later after Love Story. He had been an amateur boxer. He had been a former lifeguard. He had done some stunt work on German television before finally returning to the United States and appearing in television. Peyton Place, the TV.
Peyton Place, I remember that, a sensational hit, which my female cousins never missed an episode of on Cape Cod there one summer.
And O'Neil, as he did in What's Up, Doc, shows a real strong flair for comedy here. And the chemistry between him and Tatum is extraordinary. Interestingly enough, according to one account, this was originally discussed as being a John Huston film with Paul Newman and his daughter, one of his daughters. And obviously it would have been under the title Addie Pray, but that fell apart. Of course, it would have been a totally different film.
Totally
different. A little more depressing than what we saw today.
Somebody was asking earlier on our chat what a Coney Island was, which is uttered a couple of times in the trail. A long, tasty looking hot dog, certainly, that he keeps urging her to eat so he can get through the conversation with her and get on to whatever he's going to do next. And just the way that he says "eat your Coney Island" literally about half a dozen times in the film, I think just is a beautifully delivered line that he has to say more than once, showing his talent, I think, as a comic actor, among other things.
Excuse me, gentlemen, Dan here. I just want to say I am old enough to remember people calling a hot dog with chili sauce a Coney Island, and I also, as a boy, drank knee-high soda.
Now, the knee-highs I had never heard of, but I had heard of the Coney Islands.
I'm going to have to profess ignorance on that, Dan.
Well, the look of the film is extraordinary because the setting is around 1935, and it definitely has a feel for the period. Polly Platz, who's the production designer, who is on the verge of divorcing from Peter Bogdanovich, but she said that they had the exteriors of a lot of the towns they filmed in had not changed that much. That it was the interiors of the shops that had to be rebuilt on many occasions, and that they went out of their way to have older cars pre-1934, pre-1935 rather, that because she noticed people were driving a lot of older cars when they were visiting in that area of the country, and so a lot of the cars you see probably go back to the 1920s.
She was a superb production designer. You know, and you, Max, you may have mentioned this on Wednesday. If you really want to get granular on both Peter Bogdanovich and Polly Platt, there's kind of a his and hers series of podcasts produced in great detail a year or two ago. There's one about from Peter Bogdanovich's perspective, in which he participates at length. The Plot Thickens, hosted by Ben Mankiewicz of TCM, all about his career. And then another excellent podcast called You Must Remember This by a film journalist, Karina Longworth, about Polly Platt's very sad and tragic life in its own right, completely different from his, which they both had sad ends in some way, but lots of glories as well.
Yeah, because when I was preparing the talk the other day, it's a melancholy narrative because a majority of Bogdanovich's films are comic in nature, romantic comedies and some slapstick comedies, and yet there's a lot of tragedy surrounding the films. People who died under terrible conditions, or either before the film was released or shortly after, and hard cautionary Hollywood tales,
yes,
especially in Bogdanovich's life.
And I'm going to have to just interrupt for a moment, Max, and excuse myself here for a few minutes because I've just got a message. My partner is locked out of the building that we were in here in Oregon.
That's
so
a very Bogdanovich.
Dan to make his entrance, and I'll be back. Exactly right.
Well, that's a Ryan O'Neal-like moment. So we're going to use this opportunity to
not quite slapstick, but nonetheless.
Yes, exactly. Well, we'll see you shortly, Gary.
Back momentarily.
And then we're going to welcome Dan Cahill, our cinematography expert, who once again has a formidable challenge today, discussing the extraordinary camera work of Laszlo Kovacs. Where do you begin, Dan?
Well, I'll have to start right here with my PowerPoint. Bring it up and let's see. I want to go to my full screen. Oh, how am I going to do this? Well, I will simply start like this. There we go. That's pretty good. So the look of the film is determined by a lot of people. And one that may surprise you a little bit here is the screenwriter, Alvin Sargent, shown here next to Bogdanovich. And they did something very smart, which was, as I think Max stated, the novel takes place in the Deep South, Alabama, Louisiana, and they moved it to the bleak terrain of the Kansas prairie. And it gave us this as a look of the film. This is the second shot of the film. And boy, you know we're in a different place. Flat, very little scenery, very few trees, but a spectacularly beautiful sky, photographed in black and white. And now is the time to introduce Laszlo Kovacs. Here on the left, Mr. Kovacs was a refugee from Hungary, along with his buddy Vilmos Zsigmond. They both were filmmakers and cinematographers, and they came to the US with footage they had shot of the Russian invasion in 1956. And they were thinking, well, this will get us into Hollywood, but as happens in America, nobody really cared about watching Russians invade Hungary. It's just never helped them. But he had a lot of interesting credits prior to Paper Moon. He shot 5 Easy Pieces and Easy Rider. He went on to great acclaim, and he was one of the generation of cinematographers who started making names for themselves, along with his pal Zygmunt and Gordon Willis, whom we've discussed here before. People started noticing the photography with these guys and how stylish it was and how it contributed to the film. This is another just stunning composition that starts this scene on the hill. And I'm of the theory that if that tree wasn't there, they probably planted it just to make it look perfect. And I love the way that they've situated Addie Tatum O'Neal up higher on the hill away from the other people, because she's angry and she shows it in the scene. I also think that they must have done their set of research on still photographers of the Depression, people like Dorothea Lange, Walker Evans, Paul Strand. This has the look of one of their photos, and it sort of celebrates early 20th century agricultural architecture. I'm assuming those are grain silos, and it's just a gorgeous shot, not to mention the cars. Who doesn't love a car with a running board? I mean, they're just glorious machines. Now we're into some aspects of visual storytelling. Oh, by the way, one other point I want to make about the look of the film. Apparently, Kovacs and Bogdanovich agreed early on in their collaboration that nothing in the frame would be out of focus. This immerses you in the environment. You can see the horizon, distant as it may be, and you can see sharply the trees against the horizon. And they really wanted to immerse you in the story, which is why there are so many long takes, which we know are very immersive for the audience. This is a bit of visual storytelling, no dialogue, nothing required other than that we see Moses pray, stealing flowers off someone else's grave. This tells you who he is, what he's capable of. And here we have more visual storytelling, a lot of it derived from the way the shot is composed. Here Mose is buying a train ticket for Addie, and you will see her behind him, not in a terribly good mood. She's angry with him. And the reverse angle of this scene has something very different, but it's hard to tell on a small screen. You really need to see this on a big theatrical screen to get it. But in the window behind the clerk, there are two little girls playing happily together. But when you go back to O'Neal's shot, there's little Addie, very frustrated. So there's two different environments here as regarding the way children are portrayed. I also have to say, I just love the bare bulb. It's exquisite. It tells you what decade you're in. This is the start of the cafe scene, the $200 scene. And I always love it when they can overlap a reflection of the view reflected off the outside of the window. And one nice little touch here is there's a movie theater across the street called The Dream. And the movie they're showing is Steamboat Round the Bend, which is a John Ford film. And Mr. Bogdanovich knew Ford very well, interviewed him, wrote about him. So this is almost a little bit of an homage, but I just love the way the shot works. Now we're into the very first swindle that Addie is going to observe, and she is staying in the car. You may remember this scene. She has looked at the newspaper, noticed the deceased man's name circled, and now she's just sizing up what Mose is doing. And while we're in the car with her, we see Mose from her point of view through a window or windshield. And she observes what he does and figures out how he's doing all this while he's doing it. So this establishes her as being clever and him as being clever also. I also just want to pause here and say, I would like to invite anybody during the Q&A, or Max or Gary, to cite other famous films about con artists. I think the movies have kind of a romance with swindlers and con men. In fact, I should note, in the novel, the copyright page just after the title page sometimes features subjects under which this novel could be filed. And the number one is swindles and swindlers. So yeah, the only other swindler movie that comes to mind is The Sting, but I would like other people to suggest a few if you can. Any good heist film involves a swindle usually. This reminded me very much of Dorothea Lange's portrait of the migrant woman, migrant mother. This poor woman has 6 children. I'm not sure if they're all hers, but you immediately feel sorry for her, and so does Addie and Mose. And it's one of many touching moments in the film, beautifully captured. When I buy a car with a running board, I'm going to make sure it has a hood ornament on it. In particular, this ornament, which is just a delight to see. And every time they cut to it, it's a sign that, oh, we're back on the road again. And speaking of being on the road, here is an extended long take. This is the scene where they're trying to plan where they're going to go next. And she is looking at the map and sharing names of towns that they can hit. And Bogdanovich insisted that this scene be played as one long take, no cutting. He knows that these things are immersive, and he wants us to be able to follow what's going on between the two characters without any editing manipulating it. Well, that was his intention. The scene runs about 3 or 4 minutes, and it could only be shot, excuse me, on this particular expansive road because there were anachronistic things at the side of the road that they couldn't remove. So day 1 of trying to get this scene, they went through 25 takes. They couldn't even finish the scene in any of those takes. Took a break for a couple of days, shot some interiors because it was raining, and then they came back and it took 11 more takes to get it right. But it is a wonderful scene, and it ends with a cut to the car pulling off the main road and onto a side road, and that signals the end of Act 1. This is what any of us would look at and think is a dolly shot. There was no Steadicam in this year, and it could be a handheld shot. I don't know. It's very smooth. The camera is tracking backwards as they are walking towards the camera. It's not an easy shot to execute, and there are no visible dolly tracks. I'm not sure quite how they did that, but it's really effective, and it tells you what kind of town they're passing through. Here we have the late and very much lamented Madeline Kahn jiggling her way into our hearts as Trixie Delight. If you're interested, you can find the story from Polly Platt about designing the bra for Ms. Kahn to wear. This is the aforementioned Burton Gilliam, who I should note is described exactly this way in the novel. Pencil line mustache and oily slick back hair. He steals just about every one of the short scenes he's in, and I kind of wanted to see more of him. From that same sequence, this is Addie's point of view through the transom, watching Trixie and Imogene, her maid, just going about their day's business. And what I think is so smart here, I don't know if this was Bogdanovich or Kovacs, maybe both, they put Addie's hand in the foreground here to give it perspective and depth. Once again, nothing is out of focus. This is one of 2 frames I've captured from the 360-degree pan. This is when Mose, here I should note that Ryan O'Neal is doing all of his driving in the film, when they have to go and turn and go back in the other direction. And they execute this with a perfect 360-degree pan, which is not easy. There were extra crew members who were attending to the camera, and they all had to be walking as the camera panned around in a full circle. They had to stay behind the camera, which wasn't easy. And this is the exit shot as the bad guys, you know, John Hillerman in the passenger seat, are pursuing them. This is just kind of a tribute. I guess I never had a lot of respect for Ryan O'Neal. He was always thought of as a pretty boy, I think, but he's really good in this movie, and he's in excellent shape. He used to be an athlete, a boxer, before he got into acting, and I tip my hat to him now. And this is the final shot. It's interesting. Polly Platt and Frank Marshall, one of the producers, were scouting locations in Kansas, and they came across this very rare site, a hill in Kansas. And this is what inspired them to come up with the ending. They started shooting the film and they didn't have an ending. And it may be because they only filmed the first half of the book. So they eventually put one together. And I will stop my share here and mention that one of the things that saved the ending, that gave them an idea on this, was the $200 gag, which recurred through the first part of the film. And they realized they could use that as a closing line. And Bogdanovich has said, you've got to pay off on the joke. And they did. Not that it's all that funny, but they came back to where they had begun with the "You owe me $200." And the idea of these two lovable characters going off on a road to nowhere is just sweet. And it helps me love the movie even more.
A beautiful visual flourish, if nothing else, to finish it off. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So this movie is quite something, in my opinion. I think it's one of the best ones we've discussed here in the couple of years we've been doing this.
That's a great analysis, as always, Dan. And boy, we've had a lot of contributions to your question about Cannes movies.
Yeah.
People were mentioning titles like Nightmare Alley, both versions. David Mamet's House of Games, an excellent Cannes movie.
Yes, yes.
The Grifters by Stephen Frears. The Hustler. We had To Catch a Thief, the Ocean's 11 films. There are some borderline movies that are kind of heist movies, like The Italian Job and things of that nature. But certainly in 1973, considering this was the same year as The Sting, the con artist was definitely a fashionable subject for motion pictures.
And we love the con artists, and we want them to succeed. I mean, there would be no story if they got caught the first time out. So, we always enjoy watching someone like this ply his trade.
And it is fascinating when you compare, since they came out the same year, Paper Moon with The Sting. With The Sting is very entertaining, but it's all filmed on the Universal backlot. It's a very retro looking kind of movie. Even it doesn't have the authenticity that Paper Moon has, obviously, because Paper Moon was shot on locations.
Yeah. Yeah.
It has that one high point where Paul Newman pretends to be drunk in the train compartment car with Robert Shaw and his card playing buddies, and swindles him, and that's a hilarious scene, endlessly repeatable.
And both those films were smashes. Dan, when you were talking about some of the long camera takes, I was reminded of the comment that Bogdanovich made in some of those DVD interviews about how he loves these long takes. He says, and for the audience, it's like taking a breath and holding it. I just love that.
Yeah.
Because I'm always on the edge of my seat hoping nobody blows a line, because I know how complicated these things are to stage, and they look so effortlessly. And
it's always tragic when an actor blows a line near the end of the take.
Yes.
And everybody knows we got to go all the way back to the beginning. And on that particular highway scene, they had to stop the car, drive it back a mile or two, set up everything again, and they were pulling the car. O'Neill wasn't really driving. He was just hands on the wheel stuff. But man, I can see why they wore themselves out with 36 takes doing that.
Apparently Tatum O'Neill thought it was very funny every time they had to redo it, but she was 9, so she's given a break on that.
Forgive her that. Yeah.
And then forgive me, I don't on the black and white look of the film, Orson Welles, I know, had been a big proponent. Tell them, I know they had gone to Orson Welles, and he was recommending the use of the red filter.
Yes, indeed. It brings out skin tones, and it affects the look of the sky. If there's a blue sky that day, if it's just a cloudy gray, it wouldn't be quite as effective. But I'm kind of surprised that Kovacs pretended to be learning that. I think he would have known a red filter with black and white.
I think so
he
too.
might have just been acknowledging Wells as a genius, which reminds me of the other anecdote about the title of the film. The book was titled Addie Pray, after Tatum's character. But they were looking for a better title, and Bogdanovich found it in the song, which plays over the opening credits. It's Only a Paper Moon. And he was wondering if it would be any good. So he called his friend Orson and said, Orson, what do you think of this title? Paper Moon. And there's a long pause, and Wells says, Peter, that title is so good, you don't even have to make the movie, just release the title. So that's a good Orson Welles anecdote. They're not all good, but
that is definitely a good one.
Yeah.
And Bogdanovich, to his credit, when looking back on the film, he said it was a real team that made it, and he trusted his collaborators. I mean, he had final say on everything, but he trusted their instincts as well. Fascinating. I'm always fascinated by the screenwriting process because there's so much we don't know that takes place between the writing and the filming. And he mentioned in an interview that the original, or at least one of the versions of the Alvin Sargent screenplay, opened with little Addie Pray in a cinema watching a Shirley Temple movie and finding out that her, the parent had died. And which to me sounds like a great opening, but Bogdanovich said, we don't need that. We should go right to the cemetery. And I get it. It's one of the cruelties of editing, but it works.
Well, one interesting thing about the book is the screenwriters added a lot of background detail in the relationship between Addie and Mose. Specifically, the book just dives in and they're riding together in a car and they're pulling swindles. And we don't know how they came together. The $200 bit is not in the book. So there's a lot of really sort of anchoring the audience with who these characters are. And the argument about, you met my ma in a bar room. Well, it's a great little scene, but it's not in the book. So there was a lot of room for improvement. I'll say that much.
And what's scary to me is Bogdanovich said that they actually began production not knowing the ending.
Right.
We're still working on the screenplay, which is a terrifying way to do any production.
Hardly the only movie that ever started production.
Yeah, but it's amazing when it turns out as well as it does. It's not recommended way of filmmaking. But
or
the fact
sometimes the filmmakers will, in a sense, swindle the studio and have a script with an ending, but constantly being on the lookout for a better ending. They may have had something that they showed the studio, but and that reminds me, one other anecdote. The studio here was Paramount, which at the time was overseen by our old friend Robert Evans, whom we have talked about a lot on this series. And Evans said he liked the film, everything was good, but he wouldn't greenlight it with Ryan O'Neal. Now, why? Because during the making of Love Story, Ryan O'Neal had an affair with Ali McGraw.
Right.
And he just did not want to do anything for Ryan O'Neal. And finally, I don't know who did this, but people put O'Neal and Evans in a room together and they just worked it out. So, and it may have been O'Neal saying, Bob, just grow up, live with it. I don't know, but studio politics often gets very, very personal.
And the marketing of the film, Paramount, they cheated. I remember many years ago, I was at the University of Wisconsin-Madison going through some of their files for their cinema that was doing second run movies. And I came across the Paper Moon file. And of course I should have taken all these, but it was all the lobby cards, the original lobby cards for Paper Moon, all of which were color photographs from the film. So it's almost as though they wanted to trick people into going, not knowing they were seeing a black and white movie.
Lobby cards, which were kind of on the way out, Max, at that point, right? I think they were.
They had them for a few more years, but they were definitely in the sunset part of their existence. And you look at these color photographs, which I'm sure you can see on the internet. You can Google for Paper Moon lobby card. It doesn't have the same feeling in color. And I remember Bogdanovich interviewed many years later. Well, he gave a couple of different versions as to why he shot it in black and white at the time, or in the 80s, whenever it was. He said he didn't want it to look like a Disney movie. But in one of these more recent interviews that he gave on DVD, recent from 20 years ago, he said, oh, the two O'Neills, Ryan and Tatum, were blonde and blue-eyed. Yeah. And he thought that was distracting in color, and that was another motivating factor for him to shoot it in black and white.
And you know, this was a period movie when it was made, and you tend to think of the 30s in black and white. So I think it was very appropriate. And once again, the bleakness of the landscape is well served in the black and white mode.
This is secondhand. I didn't actually see this comment, but I remember many years ago, a friend told me that the film historian William K. Everson, and he was writing this in the 1970s, that he felt out of all the recent attempts to recapture the 1930s, he felt Paper Moon came the closest to what he remembered of the 1930s. That's huge praise.
Yeah, Bill Everson, yeah, a very strict constructionist, as you know, Max. About
yes,
this. Yeah.
No, very serious about that. And you know, it's a bit melancholy watching this film because it's kind of the new Hollywood era is starting to wind down. It's got another 18 months or so, and then things are going to be changing. Even though the blockbuster era is taking root by 1973, this was the year of The Sting and The Exorcist, but it's the director's era of getting films made that can be commercial, but a lot more personal. That's starting to come to an end at that.
Well, the first credit in the movie is the director's company, which was a very short-lived enterprise between Bogdanovich, Friedkin, and help me out,
Francis Coppola.
Francis Coppola, maybe one picture each by those, or maybe two by Bogdanovich, and that was pretty much it.
So Bogdanovich made Paper Moon. That was the first one for director's company. Then he made Daisy Miller. Coppola made The Conversation. Friedkin never made a picture for the director.
I think maybe Sorcerer had that director's company name on it, along with many others.
I'd have to check. I think the director's company was history by the time Sorcerer went before the cameras. It was pretty short-lived, and Bogdanovich was annoyed. I was trying to locate this interview. There was an online interview with him. He wanted the director's company to make commercial pictures like Paper Moon, but also be able to subsidize some riskier films from like Orson Welles and a few others. And he was disappointed that his partners didn't see it that way, and they made money off of Paper Moon and then bolted and didn't show their commitment to the director's company, according to Bogdanovich.
Yeah. Well, nobody else is talking, so.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Any other observations, except that they just did a fantastic job with the characterizations and the performers. In some of this behind the scenes footage that's available on the DVD, there's some wonderful footage of, only because you never get to see directors working with actors, but you actually see Bogdanovich. He called it walking the scene, where they filmed him doing this. He's actually playing Ryan O'Neill's role in one of the flop houses that the two characters stay at. You see him on a cot moving around, trying to get comfortable, showing what he wanted O'Neill to do. And he would literally act out a lot of the parts and sometimes even do line readings for actors. And you never get to see this. And so it says a lot about his connection to actors and how he was able to get so many strong elements.
There's this very good book, which many of you may have heard of, and I've only skimmed it. I want to read the whole thing, published this year, called The Method, How the 20th Century Learned to Act, in which we learn, among many other things, that Peter Bogdanovich attended, I think, either the Actors Studio or was a student of Stella Adler or Lee Strasberg as a young man. And I think obviously learned a lot from that. And it shows in the beautiful work that he does in all these pictures with the cast.
In his book, he wrote a wonderful book called Who the Hell's in It, where he talks about movie stars. And there's a big chapter on Stella Adler that is very funny, some very funny Stella Adler anecdotes, but she was obviously a very important influence for him moving forward.
One other thought about the casting, which by the way is flawless.
Flawless.
There isn't
not just good, flawless.
False note in the performances, but In order to meet Tatum O'Neal, Bogdanovich flew out to California and met her at her father's Malibu beach house. And Ryan greets him and saying, "Gee, Peter, you look really good, but you ought to come out here more often and run on the beach with me." And Tatum is standing there and saying, no, he's not going to do it. And Bogdanovich looks down at her and says, "Well, why did you say that?" She says, "Well, you're not the type. You never take your shirt off or your shoes." So she nailed him as a button-down New Yorker who would be uptight about running on the beach. And he said, "Well, with that level of maturity, I could not give her the part."
And he cast her right at that moment. It's amazing.
One other sort of sad note, a lot of people do not know who Tatum O'Neal's mother was. She was an absolutely spectacularly beautiful woman named Joanna Moore, who did a lot of TV work. She has a small part in Touch of Evil, the Orson Welles noir. And she, kind of like her daughter and Ryan himself, they all seem to suffer from drug and alcohol addiction in one form or another. It's a sad thing. I don't know much about Griffin O'Neal, who was Tatum's brother. I think he had some film work that he did.
He was in The Escape Artist. That was a Zoetrope.
And it's associated in a very tragic accident on the making of The Escape Artist, where Francis Coppola's son was killed in a boating accident in the Chesapeake Bay when that film
Yes.
was being made.
Yes. So the O'Neal family is not a happy one. Very sad to report, because there's genuine talent going on there too.
And Dan, now that you mentioned Joanna Moore, I remember her vividly. She had a bit of a Southern accent. Did she
I
not?
think so. Yeah.
I would see her in a lot of Alfred Hitchcock Hour episodes.
Yes.
Beautiful. I was always wondering, she's good. Whatever happened to her? And
Yeah.
thank you for giving
She
some
lived-
attention.
She lived into her 60s, I believe. So it wasn't a tragic young death, but she did not have a happy life. I just want to note, since we often recognize this, that Alvin Sargent, the writer, won 2 Oscars, one previous to this for Julia, the film with Jane Fonda and Vanessa Redgrave. And I'm trying to remember the second one.
Ordinary People, I believe, is the other one.
Yes.
And
thank you.
Julia actually came 4 years later in 1977.
You're right. But he's quite a gifted adapter of books, very clearly.
And Bogdanovich told a funny story that in one of the early meetings with Alvin Sargent, he praised the script but said it needs a total rewrite. But to Bogdanovich's credit, he kept Sargent around, and he trusted him. He said, "Listen, we'd like to have a scene like this. Go off and write us something."
Yeah.
And so and Bogdanovich was a writer himself. He could have easily just taken over, but he didn't. So obviously he respected Sargent's skills as a screenwriter.
Well, it says something for a director who is not a megalomaniac wanting to do everything himself. You hire a good cameraman, let him do his work. Same with the script writer. So I respect that.
Well, I know we're going to have a lot of interesting comments and questions from people. However, I know coming up, and I'm going to invite Lori to assist me here. We have a very important New Plaza Cinema online presentation coming up with Stephen Smith for Alfred Hitchcock. Lori, perhaps you can just share a little data with us on that.
Yeah, okay. Well, I just wanted to tell you all that upcoming we have Stephen Smith talking about the great locations of Hitchcock's films. These are his books. He worked with a couple of very collaborative associates of Hitchcock's. On the 10th, we'll be talking about Hitchcock's America, location filming with the Master of Suspense, and talking about some of the different locations. And then on Sunday, the 14th, we'll be doing our talk back on The Man Who Knew Too Much. And there's a little synopsis on that. You can find this on the Eventbrite page as well, going through New Plaza Cinema. So that's all I have to say. If anyone has any questions, about the talkback or anything they'd like to share, please, by all means, raise your hand and I'll be more than happy to call on you.
And just a reminder, this is the remake of The Man Who Knew Too Much, which Hitchcock
Right.
originally made in England in 1934, but this is the VistaVision James Stewart Doris Day.
And I would say if you have time, try to see the original as well. It's only 75 minutes or so. It's a very interesting comparison. As Hitchcock himself said, one was the work of a talented amateur, the other a professional.
But what's fascinating, and I know Stephen, I don't want to steal his thunder, but it's interesting to compare the women's parts in the two films. It's quite a different interpretation of the character. But anyhow, we can't wait to see Stephen, and we can't wait to converge again on the 14th.
He knows his stuff, and he's gonna get into the Bernhard Herrmann thing, of which he wrote an entire book on, the great composer of those classic 50s Hitchcocks.
And Bernhard Herrmann is on screen in The Man Who Knew Too Much. He's the guy conducting the orchestra in the album.
Really?
Oh yeah,
that's Bernhard.
Yeah.
No one's raised their hand, but I would like to mention that a lot of this film, you guys have known me for a little while now. I have this like really crazy associative brain that when I see something, it just takes me somewhere else. And that last shot in the movie just was so reminiscent of the movie The Kid. And then like, it's almost like after I saw that last shot, like I had to rethink the whole film, sort of as a little bit of an homage to The Kid, because she wears those overalls almost the whole movie. And just, you know, the way they play off of each other, both sort of scampy and running around the country.
Charlie Chaplin's The Kid, Laurie, is what you're referencing,
yes,
right?
I'm sorry,
No.
Charlie Chaplin's The Kid. Yeah, definitely. You know, in that end shot, you know, all tramp movies end with him going nowhere, you know, that existential character, you know, you don't know where he's going to end up next. Someone just raised their hand, but put it down.
I just want to, and since you're talking about that, Laurie, I wanted to, Rena wrote in her comment, this is Rena saying, I was distracted by the closing shot in that empty landscape immediately after leaving the aunt's home in St. Joe. Stylish, but a break in logic. Any comments? Break in logic, I mean, if it maybe seemed a little tacked on, it's because it kind of was tacked on. They weren't sure about the ending. And very close to when they filmed that, they decided to start pulling elements together, like the truck breaking down, and then I want my $200, and the paper moon photo. They brought the elements together for that, leading to that ending. I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts, whether you felt it stood out or didn't merge together.
I think it just made me rethink the whole film as sort of a version of The Kid, you know, like I almost wanted to go back and start watching it again. But I do have to say, you know, what we touched on was the interiors. What an amazing job. You know, I used to do set dressing and decoration. And when I see movies like this and you see the attention to detail, you know, I have to, you know, tip my hat to people like that, because it's just mind blowing. So, well, we have a hand raised. Rena, if you could start your video, or definitely unmute yourself.
Yeah, this is just a follow-up. You know, it was an exceptionally beautiful film for its details, which is why that break in logic really stood out to me, that the little girl comes running into this barren landscape. What did she run, 20 miles to get there? You know, and it just took me out of the logic of the film. That's all.
I have to admit,
go ahead, Max.
No, I have to admit the thought crossed my mind too when I saw her running along the country road, and then I just accepted it. It's go ahead, Dan.
For whatever it's worth, the book has the same conclusion of Mose and Addie going off together on the road again, but the second half of the book is virtually unfilmable. And I'm so glad they left it alone. They started pulling swindles involving selling non-existent bales of cotton by counterfeiting warehouse receipts. I mean, it's just dull stuff and doesn't involve any of the actual swindling that we enjoy so much. So I do not recommend the book, or if you have to pick it up, stop halfway through.
Or just look at it with a different set of eyes. I know some people in the comments actually said they liked the book. So
that's fair.
You know, that's the beauty of the arts, right? We all see what we need to see in whatever form of art we're reading or looking at. So, so really no more questions, guys?
Any
Good,
more
quiet audience.
Oh, wait a minute. A little bit of trivia here that we were talking about before broadcast here was that many of us have forgotten that Paper Moon was briefly turned into a television series. I believe it was
Right.
ABC.
The following year, it ran for one season, and Jodie Foster played the Tatum O'Neal role for 13 episodes. There was some excellent screenwriters for a number of the episodes. I don't think any well-known directors, but and it doesn't seem to be out there like the thousands of television shows which can be found on the internet. For some reason, this one isn't available, it seems.
I have a comment about the closing scene I'd like to share with you.
Sure.
Yeah, it reminds me of, talking about swindlers, the closing scene in Oliver where the Artful Dodger and Fagin just go off on a road that leads to nowhere. And that was made in 1968, I think.
Yeah.
So that could have been an inspiration.
Same thing.
And that's a film that we didn't mention.
You know, two people walking off into the unknown, you know.
Into the fog.
Into the fog.
Chaplin sort of did it again in Modern Times as well, the ending of that film.
Definitely there's a Chaplin-esque influence there without a question.
Yeah, especially since she wears those overalls. And I mean, The Kid is by Charlie Chaplin. It's just such a wonderful, heartwarming movie.
It is. And you remind me of the costumes, Laurie, which Polly Platt did have a hand in a lot of the costumes. And one of the big challenges was the reveal that they had to make about the hidden money, which they ended up putting in little Addie's laced hat. That was something that apparently Polly Platt had a lot to do with coming up with that idea, because they were trying to find a way.
Where would she hide it?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, in plain sight is always the answer. And
she found this lace material that could be seen through and just decorated the hat with that, and they kept it. It's
simple
answer.
Marianne has her hand raised.
Yes, yes, because I like to know, and I'm not the only one, Suzanne is asking also the same, how many Oscar nominations did the movie get? Was it only Tatum, or were they?
I think 4 altogether.
Yeah, 4.
It was 2 for Best Supporting Actress, which also was Madeline Kahn. It got a nomination for the screenplay by Alvin Sargent, and then it got a sound nomination, and that was it.
Yeah, very good sound mixer, Dick Portman, who worked on a number of Robert Altman's initial multi-track films at that time.
But Bogdanovich was upset. Well, he was upset that he didn't get a nomination, and he was upset that O'Neill didn't get a nomination. And he admitted he stayed away from the Oscars that night, which maybe was a a little childish, but he did.
Laszlo Kovacs should have gotten a nomination.
Exactly. He should have gotten a nomination.
Such a beautiful movie.
Yeah. Oh, well.
But it was, anyway, four nominations. Now, granted, 1973 was a major year. It's
a very strange, if you remember the 5 Best Picture nominees that year, The Exorcist, The Sting, Cries and Whispers by Ingmar Bergman, American Graffiti, and the least deserving nominee, A Touch of Class with George Segal and Glenda Jackson. Those are the 5.
Yes, that was
weird.
It was like the following year, which was 74, which had some great nominations, but then there was the Towering Inferno thrown in there. It's like, what was
yes. Well,
but I'm hoping next year, when 1973 is 50 years old, maybe we'll do a special presentation on the year in film for 19.
It's a fascinating year.
Fascinating.
What you did not say today, Max, is that it was the birthday of Peter Bogdanovich yesterday. You forgot
Thank you, Marianne.
Wow.
His birthday was yesterday. Of course, we lost him on January 6th, but his birthday was yesterday, and I have to credit Sean Moore, our PR maven, who's traveling right now. It was her idea. She said, "Wait a minute, Bogdanovich has a birthday. We need to do something." So, Sean, we want to thank for acknowledging that. But his birthday would have been yesterday. He would have been 83.
Thank you, Sean.
There's George Jetson was born today.
Well, we could go on forever about Paper Moon. It's a movie that you could just see over and over again.
Yeah, it's total eye candy. I love just the visuals are so, the deep focus, the black and white.
And if I can resort to my typical sophomoric self for a minute, I think Madeline Kahn's line reading, "My, aren't you a show dog?" I think that may be one of my very favorite line readings in a Hollywood film.
She had a lot of line readings like that throughout her career, thanks to Mel
She's
Brooks.
amazing. And Bogdanovich said that she couldn't understand why she was so funny. And I remember it was after she passed away, he wrote an article for the New York Observer, touching remembrance of her, about how for What's Up Doc, she went to a screening of it and the audiences were howling every time she spoke, and she found it very stressful, and she ended up leaving the screening because it didn't have to be funny, but her delivery, it made it funny. And he just gave some wonderful anecdotes about working with her. And
well, there's one about that scene on the hill.
Yes.
Where she didn't want to say tits. She wanted to say breasts instead. And, they sort of went back and forth on it. And right before they rolled the camera on take one, he just whispered in her ear, "Say tits, just do it once." And she did a beautiful job. And he even talks about how the look on her face after she says it is kind of awkward and embarrassed, as if she had crossed a line. And it just adds so much to her character.
You feel something for the character. You really feel
Yeah.
something for her.
Exactly.
We have another hand raised, Diana J. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is so trivial. I barely thought to mention it, but I was working in television in London in 62, 63, and we were doing co-productions, Associated Rediffusion with Westinghouse and NBC, and there were two television directors who also did film, whose company was called the Directors Company, and this predates what you've been talking about, and that was Franklin Schaffner and Fielder Cook. So maybe they just passed the company on, named on down, but they certainly had a company that was just them called that.
Was that in England, you said?
In America. They were American working in England.
Okay.
That's worth looking into. Thank you for sharing, Diane.
Franklin Schaffner, we know, is a director of Patton, most famously. Fielder Cook, accomplished TV director, including the famous Updike stories, Too Far to Go. That's probably his most well-known TV film.
So I was sort of fascinated when you said, "Oh yes, the Directors Company with these three directors," and I thought, 5? Or maybe they passed the name on.
It was definitely two separate operations, and I don't know how the naming thing worked out, but I'm going to look into that. That's fascinating.
There was a funny story that was told when that director's company was announced, that the author of the story imagined the three guys out on the street, like, having a bravado shouting match about their accomplishments. And Bogdanovich shouts out 3 New York Film Critics Awards. And Friedkin says 5 Academy Awards. And then Coppola says $150 million. And that ends the conversation.
That was an Easy Riders Raging Bulls.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. That's a great. Yeah, that was the height of this generation of directors who was exploding on the scene in the late
the Medici princes of their time.
And I have to say that brought about a kind of renaissance in American filmmaking. These guys inspired me to go to film school. A lot of universities were creating film programs at that time because there was a real thirst for young people to go out and make films. They thought, by God, if these people can do it, I can too. And it seemed accessible, not just something that you had to be working in a major studio and work your way up for, but it seemed like there were ways to break into the racket.
Because a number of them, including Bogdanovich, had broken in through like Roger Corman, low budget pictures, and they weren't necessarily born into the business per se. And so forth.
A lot of them, were influenced by sheer fact of growing up in America by old, Hollywood cinema. And then, of course, the new wave films that, they obviously were so heavily influenced by as well.
Somebody here
Sorry,
just
to end
did a nice,
conversation.
one of our listeners just did a nice little shout out and RIP to a director who passed away, I believe, last week, Bob Rafelson of Five
Oh.
Easy Pieces, and
I did
certainly
not know that.
a very important film of that same era, and was part of that company BBS, which backed the Last Picture Show.
An Easy Rider. And
Easy Rider.
yes.
What else did Rafelson direct? I know he
He did The
did
King of
Atlantic
Marvin.
City. No, Marvin Gardens.
King of Marvin Gardens.
Yeah.
Marvin
Stay
Gardens.
Hungry.
Stay Hungry. I'd like to see that film again.
But most importantly, he was the producer of the TV series The Monkees. So
Where would we be without the monkeys?
Ready. Already. Someone said that they found the pilot of the Paper Moon TV show on YouTube. So
Aha, good.
All right, we'll check it out.
See that before the copyright police get wind of it.
yeah, right. Well, if no one has any more questions, I want to thank everyone for coming to our Sunday talk back on Paper Moon. This session was recorded and will be posted within the next 24 to 48 hours. So thank you all for coming and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
See you on August 14th for Hitchcock.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
And then 14th.
Take care, everybody. Thank you all.
Bye.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye.